Hey guys, welcome to Team Peachtree. Timmy says hi and bye. He's off to Dreamland. We are here to continue our journey through the Van Gogh letters and look at um, just how things go so pear shaped, where he ends up being kicked out of Arles essentially. And one of the reasons why I wanted to come on today, it's the 23rd, 24th, hey Chelsea, was just to kind of keep the same chronological time, try and sort of keep pace with it. That does sometimes help to see things instead of seeing things in the rearview mirror. You can feel the passage of time that as it played out in real time. So that's really the point of that. Now, you guys may remember that in letter 76, the previous one, we dealt with um, this letter from Vincent to Theo on the 19th, and he really captured the spirit of what is going on there. He says, I seem to see so much brotherly anxiety in your kind letter that I think it's my duty to break my silence. And he says, I write to you in the full possession of my faculties and not as a madman. Now, I must say, sometimes when I think back on when I wrote The Murder of Vincent van Gogh, um, I'm a little bit confused because one of there were three tiers when I wrote that book that I wanted to address. The tiers were the idea that he was a madman. Was he mad? The other one was, did he cut off his ear? And the other one was, did he take his own life? And I quickly realized while writing the book that the one tier was essentially based on the other tier. And so one of the things I wanted to explore, one of the things I want to investigate. Hi Mel, hi another Amy, Alina. Wow, you guys are really here pretty quickly with very little forewarning. Anyway, good to have you guys here. But one of the things I wanted to test and investigate was it true that Van Gogh cut off his ear because he was mad? And so, if you use madness as the motive or the explanation, um, does it really work? And there's actually a fourth tier, which is when he was in the asylum, was he in the asylum because he was mad, kind of thing. And what I realized writing the book was as soon as you dismantle the madness narrative, then a weird thing happens. The ear incident becomes very strange, very mysterious. And not only that, so does the um, incident where he lost his life. And so, going through these letters chronologically, it's definitely an open question. Did he cut off his ear? Did he cut off his ear or did somebody else cut off his ear? I think there's a plausible scenario, there's a plausible case for someone else cutting off his ear. Um, but you certainly, if you say that he cut off his ear, you certainly can't say he did it because he was mad. You could say he got drunk or that he was um, suffering from some sort of temporary lapse of sanity, certainly. But clearly, you can't just say that, well, he was a mad artist or something like that. And definitely, whatever scenario you believe, Paul Gauguin had a role to play in the whole thing. It's very interesting that Paul exits the whole thing when he loses his ear. In any event, we're now around about 3 months later, and Van Gogh is still not out of the woods. He is keen to get back to painting. He is keen to um, carry on where he left off, but the townsfolk aren't. The townsfolk are convinced that there's something seriously wrong with this guy and they want him out of their community. And I think that is probably where a lot of the seed germinated that Van Gogh was mad in this community. Someone was spreading that idea, and I wouldn't be surprised if it started with Gauguin. Sharon Edwards, good to see you. Yvonne, good to see you as well. Okay, so we're going to pick up the narrative on the 22nd of March, which, based on where you are, is a day ago. And then I think there are only two more letters in March, the 24th and the 26th. Oh, and the 29th. So we're not going to deal with the 29th. Should we? We might deal with the 26th because it's quite a short letter. Okay. How's everybody doing? By the way, our best wishes to Terry Dean. Terry, I think, has flown from San Francisco to Jackson Hole. It's her birthday, so our best wishes to Terry Dean. I don't know if we'll see her, but if we don't, well, it's because she's exploring those spectacular sites. I was there a while ago. It really is quite an incredible part of America. I've got a green long sleeve shirt with Jackson Hole on it. It definitely is one of my favorites. Okay. Okay, so you guys ready to get going? My dear Theo, thank you for your letter, which I've just received, all the more because in this case, I would rather be in the wrong than in the right. Certainly, we are absolutely and entirely in agreement as to the general argument of your letter. That's how the thing looks to me, too. Now, I've got no idea what he's talking about here. Um, we don't have Theo's letter, so we don't know what they've discussed. It does seem a little bit cryptic, doesn't it? What do you think he means by I would rather be in the wrong than in the right? What do you think Van Gogh means when he says I would rather be in the wrong than in the right? Any thoughts, any ideas on that? And the strange thing is that after saying that, he kind of says to Theo, I totally agree with you and your argument, right? So one wonders whether Theo also kind of suggests a strategy of being in the wrong than in the right, right? Any thoughts on what he's getting at when he says, I would rather be in the wrong than in the right? Again, bear in mind it's the 22nd of March. This is still the direct aftermath of the incident. The authorities are investigating. The mayor is going to reach a decision. This is like, I won't say it's national news, but it's certainly front page news, what he has done and what has happened to him in all, right? So Yvonne says wrong about Gauguin or his mental health condition, the house issue. Um, can I tell you what his wrong is right? Well, this is my opinion. When he says, I would rather be in the wrong, Rookie says he thinks he's in the right, even though others say otherwise. So, what I think could be the case here is that if he is right, again, this is just my opinion. If he's right, then let's say um, right being innocent, right? I would rather be in the wrong, almost like being guilty, than in the right, than being innocent. Now, what would it mean if he was innocent? What would mean that somebody else was guilty? Wouldn't that be Gorgan? Now, if he says, I would rather be in the wrong, um, then I guess what he's saying, it's almost like he's saying, I'd rather people misunderstood what really happened and people blamed me and thought I was mad than tell them what really happened. And then there are going to be serious consequences. There's going to be a big PR mess just before this World Fair between, Gorgan is going to have to answer to what he did. There's going to be a big fallout. And these brothers who have been trying so hard to set something up within the art community are going to be essentially targeting another artist. What's that going to look like, right? So that's exactly what I thought. So does that make sense? What I've just said, that when he says I'd rather be in the wrong, it's that people assume that he's mad and that he uh, whatever, that everything is his fault, than that someone else is to blame, and in this case Gorgan, a more respected artist, an artist who's got quite important um, trans- transactions and contracts with his brother, and that are worth a fair amount of money. And so, can you see when he says, "I would rather be in the wrong than in the right," is actually acknowledging or admitting that he's okay with people getting the wrong impression about him. And then there's also a kind of a sense that there's consensus with Theo, that Theo also thinks that this is the way to go, right? Now, and you might say, yeah, maybe it could be. I'm not really sure if you can say that for a fact, but if you take this scenario and you accept it, you say, okay, you know what, that does actually make sense, and I believe it. Then the whole uh, incident that followed this, because in a real sense, the ear incident is a test run for um, the whole scenario where he lost his life. And so it's almost like with the Ramses, where the Ramses had the 911 call and then their friends covered for them. Remember, the cops came to the house and nobody opened, and that was in a way a test run for what happened a few days later. Then all the friends came to the house again, and I won't say covered for them, but certainly by hook or by crook um, interfered with what really happened, with the perception of what really happened. And so the possibility is that the same thing happened here, that the ear incident was in a way a test run for the narrative that would follow a year and a half later. So that's what's really important, to try and figure out what happened in the ear incident. How did the brothers respond to it? How did they deal with it? What was the scenario surrounding it? And so, you've kind of got to, the central question, if you're dealing with it in a true crime way, would be, you would say, what is more likely, that Gorgan cut off Van Gogh's ear and then skedaddled, or that Van Gogh cut off his own ear, including cutting right through this artery and then continuing right the way through? He didn't cut off a small piece of his ear, he cut off the whole ear, right? If you cut off a small piece of his ear, then I would acknowledge, and if it was the earlobe at the bottom, I would acknowledge that might be possible or even likely. But since the entire ear was cut off, and we know they were arguing at that time, doesn't it make more sense that someone who is arguing with cut off his ear rather than he cut off his own ear? Anyway, that's the one scenario. The other scenario then is, in other words, who is the more likely suspect in cutting off Van Gogh's ear, Van Gogh or somebody else. By the same token, when he loses his life, who's the most likely suspect? Van Gogh, whose output is really ramping up, or another person, in this case, Dr. Gachet. And we know that they also had kind of disagreements, and Van Gogh even said very early on, he is not to be trusted. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Yvonne says, it's so sad to think of it as a test run. It is. Rookie says, I now understand how you explained it. Okay. Yeah, it does look like that. Just remember, it's in a way similar to the cover-up with Gabby Petito, with Brian Laundrie, where you might say, why on earth would Gabby lie about what happened to her? Why would she do that? If she was the one who was injured, why would she lie about it? And it's the exact same thing with Vincent van Gogh. If he was the one that was injured, why would he lie about it? Well, because someone else was paying for the adventure. And if that person found out what really happened, they would recall the person and say, look, I'm not going to pay for any of this. You're abusing my support, and you're not ready for it anyway. And, just come on home. And so we know Gabby really, really wanted the van life adventure to happen. And Vincent van Gogh really, 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 really wanted the Yellow House thing to happen. And it was one of the biggest moments of his life, right? Whoa, excuse me. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Alina says, fighting for justice sometimes doesn't come. Yeah, it does seem more likely with the sword, doesn't it? And the fact that he left the sword behind and then later asked for it. Okay, let's continue. So it just really stands out. I would rather be in the wrong than in the right. And then he says, the news is that I think Monsieur Soles is busy finding me an apartment in another part of town. I approve of this, for in this way I should not be obliged to move immediately. I should keep some sort of niche, and then I should certainly go for a trip to Marseille or further on to find something better. Monsieur Soles is very kind and very loyal, and a pleasant contrast to others here. So there it is. That is all the news for the moment. If you were to write, try all the same to get them to give me the right to go out into the town. So he is essentially a prisoner. He is kind of under armed guard, and he doesn't have freedom of movement, right? As far as I can judge, I'm not properly speaking a madman. And so you can see what is going on is there is a lot of talk that this guy is mad. The word mad is being associated and circulated around Van Gogh, especially now, especially now that they're trying to decide, can he be allowed to stay in the town? Can he be allowed to stay in his house? And people are saying, no, he's mad. We can't have him here. And you have the word madman coming up there. And Van Gogh is referring to it. Van Gogh is aware that they are saying that he's mad, right? Here is another reference. In the previous letter, again, very early on, he says, I'm writing to you not as a madman. So he is very aware that what people are saying about him. And he's saying, I'm not mad, basically. He goes on to say, you will see that the canvases I've done in the intervals are steady and not inferior to the others. I miss the work more than it tires me. Now, what is incredible here is Van Gogh gives his own critical analysis of what proves that his state of mind hasn't deteriorated. And it's something I've been saying from the very beginning. If he was painting a picture every single day, then when did he kind of lose his marbles? when he was kind of busy and prolific. It takes quite a lot of energy to, especially when you are being creative or expressing yourself in an authentic way. If it's coming out of your being, then it exacts kind of a price. And so if your being is compromised, if you are feeling out of sorts, if you are struggling with some kind of psychological problem, if you're depressed, that's going to reflect in your output. And guess what he says? Well, have a look at the quality of my painting. It hasn't changed. The the level of skill, the the whole execution is just the same as all the other artworks, and I think that is an excellent argument. Another argument you could make is look at his letters. Does he suddenly uh, get muddled in his letters? Does he suddenly talk in a muddled way about going to brothels and just kind of getting very mixed up in what's going on? Does he talk about a radical shift where he no longer wants to be an artist? Does he talk about meeting a person who believes aliens exist and it totally changes his um, outlook on life? Does any of that is any of that apparent? And the fact that he's such a prolific artist and the fact that he's such a prolific writer shows you that he's um, of sound mind at the very least. I mean, if you're not of sound mind, you simply can't put pen to paper, and you can't paint the way he's been painting. Now, you can certainly make the argument that his output has been interrupted, but losing one's ear, nearly bleeding to death, you can imagine anyone's output would be interrupted. He certainly doesn't come back and his art is suddenly very fuzzy and he's painting neon lightning bolts or something like that. There isn't really a disconnect, or there isn't really discord. Alina says, does Theo come to his rescue? Not really. Pharaoh, good to see you here. Okay, let's continue. So he says, certainly I should be pleased to see Signac, and Signac is another artist. Let's see if we can have a look at some of his art. I think, doesn't he make use of thinking of Surat, I think. Anyway, this is Paul Signac's art. That's Paul Signac. He's a neo-impressionist painter, and I was going to say, he helped develop the artistic technique pointillism. Now, if you think about it, if this artist developed pointillism, and he was a contemporary of Van Gogh, it's almost as if Van Gogh developed stripism or dotism. I don't know if you get what I mean. If you look at the picture over my shoulder, a lot of Van Gogh's artworks have got like what almost looks like an energy signature, a lot of short little lines, right? And that is almost an exaggeration of pointillism. Pointillism is very fine dots, whereas Van Gogh's technique is a kind of a rougher, larger, fuzzier version of that. There's an example of pointillism. You can see it's similar. It's very similar, but certainly those dots are small. I'll show you a couple of other examples. So there's a picture of his wife using that technique. Can you see it's full of very small dots? And you can see that this technique allows for a fair amount of what's the word, detail. Look at the detail. How sensitively the lips and the mouth are done over here, and the eyes and the ear. If you look at Van Gogh's art, it's far fuzzier. It's a far broader way of showing. Where am I? I'm now totally lost in this picture. Where is her face? Totally lost. Okay, let's go up. There's the umbrella. Follow the umbrella down. Oh, there's her face, I think. There's her eyes. Can you see how there's a lot more detail in this technique than in Van Gogh's technique? In Van Gogh's technique, it's almost as if it's slightly out of focus. Look at the mouth over there. But you can also see it is a similar technique, right? Okay. Let's have a look at a couple of others. There you can see the same kind of thing. It's got a little bit of a Monet feel about it, but almost like pixelated Monet. In the time of harmony, the golden age is not past. It is in the future. Okay. So it's got some of it has quite a dreamy quality, doesn't it? And that's by the same artist, but you can see it's a slightly different style. I quite like that, I must say. That's not bad. But it certainly is a different style to Van Gogh's style. This, certainly the fields in the background feel a little bit like some of the artwork that Van Gogh has produced. It still is slightly different though. But you can see that they are certainly contemporaries in terms of time, right? Gasomedes at Clichy, 1886. Sunday, Demanche, 1889. There's a cat over there in the foreground. The Port at Sunset, 1892. Well, this actually ended up in the Carnegie Museum of Art, Pittsburgh, the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Guggenheim Museum, Bilbao, and so on. So the point is, it's this artist that actually comes to visit Van Gogh in late March 1889. So it's not a nobody. It's a pretty it's an artist who, like Gauguin, is going to become quite a significant player, if that's the word, a significant person in terms of the whole body of expressionism, right? And so this person comes to Arles and finds Van Gogh in a particular way. And I think I don't know if he writes a letter to Theo, but certainly Vincent writes about Signac, and this is what he says. I should be pleased to see him if he has to pass through here after all. Then they must let me go out with him to show him my canvases. So you kind of get the sense that Vincent is thinking, although I'm in the wrong, this guy can kind of give the locals a vote of confidence. This guy can kind of, he's French and he can kind of put in a good word for me. He says, perhaps it would have been a good thing for me to accompany him where he was going, and if we had tried to find a new place together. But there isn't much likelihood of that now. So what's the use of putting himself out on purpose to come and see me? There's one very good thing in your letter where you say that one must not let oneself have any illusions about life. The thing is to put up with the real facts of your destiny, and then there you are. I'm writing in haste to send off this letter, which will, however, perhaps only reach on Sunday, when Signac will have already left. I can't help it. All I would ask is that people whom I do not even know by name, for they took good care to arrange that I should not know who sent the letter in question. Do not meddle with me when I'm busy painting or eating or sleeping or taking a turn at the brothel, since I haven't a wife. Now they are meddling with everything, but in spite of everything, I wouldn't give a damn if it weren't for the grief that I am very unwillingly causing you, or rather that they are causing, and for the delay in my work. If they should now, can you see, he doesn't really blame himself for what has happened. you know he blames them for kind of overreacting. You would think that he would blame himself if he did cut off his own ear. If Gorgan cut off his ear, Gorgan's to blame. Why would he blame himself? I suppose you could say he drove Gorgan to do it, and maybe Gorgan went mad. Okay. He says, if they should continue, these repeated and unexpected agitations may change a passing and momentary mental disturbance into a chronic disease. So that is how he describes what he's going through, is that he has unexpected agitations and that he's suffering from a mental disturbance. And I suppose at the very least you could say that he's suffering from anxiety, and when he suffers from anxiety, he can become um, excited, if that's the word. He can become agitated, but he refers to it as mental disturbance. And he says it's temporary. I just for a short time I become agitated. Believe me, if nothing intervenes, I shall now be able to do the same and perhaps better work in the orchards than I did last year. Now let us be as firm as possible and, in short, not let them tread too painfully on our toes. From the start, I've been faced with very mischievous opposition here. All this stir will see. Can you see? He says, from the start, I've been faced with very mischievous opposition. In other words, it seems to him as though something strange and contrived is taking place. And again, one must wonder, was Gorgan not the originator of that? Did Gorgan not leave with all sorts of stories in place? And if you say, why on earth would you say that about Gorgan? Well, when Van Gogh died, Gorgan continued to express slurs about Van Gogh, saying that he was a madman. So you can imagine if he was saying that insensitively after Van Gogh's death, why would he have not been saying it in defense of himself at this particular time, right? Uh, I don't think it's depression, because you would imagine someone who's depressed wouldn't really want to work, would want to give up, would want to be saved, and would want people to help them. Van Gogh wants to continue trying. Thanks a lot for that, Deborah. I appreciate that. Okay, let's continue. I just heard a sound downstairs. I'm just going to go and check out what it is. Hold on, guys. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just found out that it was just the wind blowing a door closed. So that's been resolved. Now I'm out of focus. Quite strange. Okay, there we go. Is that better? So he says all of this stir will naturally be good for impressionism. Well, he certainly was right about that. But you and I as individuals will suffer because of a pack of skunks and cowards. This seems to be Van Gogh in bristling a bristling mood. And does it seem like he's depressed and self-pitying, or does he blame other people in a sense for why he's in the situation he's in? Then he says there's some reason for keeping your indignation to yourself, isn't there? I've already seen in a paper here a really good article on decadent or impressionist literature. This is to me another cryptic remark. He says there's a reason to keep your indignation to yourself. So, I don't think it's just trying to be, how can I put it, trying to be, find all sorts of things just because you want to. I think there is real meat to this idea, this theory. He goes on to say, but what are these articles in papers, etc., to you or me? As my good friend Roulin says, it is to act as a pedestal for others. But at least you would like to know for whom or for what, wouldn't you? But then you could have no objection. But to be on a pedestal for something you do not know, that is trying. It's also quite cryptic language. What does he mean exactly? Be on a pedestal for others. What does he talk? What does he mean? He goes on to say, after all this for nothing, after all this for nothing, provided you go straight to your goal, a secure home for you is a great gain for me too. And that done, we can perhaps find another, more peaceful way of settling things after your marriage. Now, do you remember the original article that I showed you guys where I said the art experts believe that Van Gogh cut off his ear because he found out that his brother was getting married? And he thought, wow, so now I'm not going to be supported by Theo anymore. And if you think about it, that is in a way a cousin to the belief where you say the reason why I would not tell the truth about what happened was also potentially either whether Theo knew about it or Theo also basically not telling the truth about it, was that they were trying to make a name for themselves as an art dealer and as an artist, and that certainly wouldn't help their cause in a sense. So he says basically, you getting married is a great gain for me. It means you're going to be stable. It means you're going to be settled. It means you're going to have a secure home. Things are going to be more peaceful. So yeah, you have it in his own words, basically saying, I think it's great that you're getting married. And I don't remember seeing anywhere in all the letters he's written between January and now any real criticism or reservations about it. He congratulates his brother. He talks in a fond and kind way about his fiancee, Jo. Right? So for an art expert to say what they say, makes sense, except it's got nothing to do with the evidence that we've got here. And, just shows you how poor the ability to investigate this sort of thing is with some of these art experts. They would really be shit in true crime, I must say. Okay, let's continue. If sooner or later I should really go mad, I think I should not want to stay on here at the hospital, but just now I want to come and go freely. So that is a really weird thing for him to say. It's like people are talking about him being mad and going mad, and there he even, in a way, acknowledges it. If I do go mad, then I'd like to come and go freely. And I think that does mess with your understanding of this. And of course, when he talks about going mad, I really don't think it's an actual madness that's taking over. I believe it's the syphilis that is making it's almost like a physical um, malaise that is starting to affect his mental health, if I can put it that way. And we do know that syphilis can do that at an advanced stage. He goes on to say, the best thing for me would certainly be not to live alone, but I would rather live in a cell forever than sacrifice another life to mine. So you can see there as well that he really is feeling a little lonely, that he is feeling that what he needs is company. And why wouldn't he? He's about 35 years old. He doesn't really have a girlfriend, doesn't really have friends. His family are all far away. He is in a town that is largely unfriendly to him. He just wants a friendly face, And anyway, he goes on to say, for this business of painting is a sorry, poor job nowadays. If I were a Roman Catholic, I should have the resource of turning monk, but not being precisely that way, as you know, I haven't that resource. This is also a very astonishing insight because, of course, France in 1888, 1889, 1890 was very much divided into Roman Catholic France and Protestant France. And guess what? Van Gogh was a Protestant. He came from a Protestant family, and he, not just like there wasn't just like a little bit of he wasn't just like slightly salted with Protestantism. He studied to become a pastor. His father was a pastor, for goodness sake. And so, the fact that he doesn't go to church in a Roman Catholic church is fodder for the Catholics around him to say, this guy is evil. This guy, we don't want him here. This guy is kind of the enemy. And guess what? When he ends up in Arles, by the way, when I was in Namibia, and there were a bunch of French people on the boat, the boat where the seal came. I wanted to say, what, I was in France and I really liked it then. I was in, but geez, they could barely understand my pronunciation. So if I said Arles, I think I just said it like 5 times, and then they were like, how did they say it? Arles. I think they said like Arles or Arles, Arle. I think they said something like that. And then when I said Auvers, I think they said Auvers was. But they said, although it's you would say it's similar, when you say it to them and they realize what you're saying, you realize there's like a world of difference. It's almost like saying Champs Elysees compared to Champs Elysees, right? So anyway, the point is the France of that time was split into the sort of Roman Catholic and the Protestant. And when Van Gogh was in Auvers-sur-Oise, um, the and he died. The Roman Catholics didn't want to bury him in their churchyard. They didn't want to um, allow him a service in the church because it was a Roman Catholic church. And so he ended up having a service in the inn where he died. Like literally, the funeral service was held in the hotel, and then guess what? The hotel went out of business. So scandal and rumors and gossip in this time could really ruin a person. So it really was a real thing. Oh, Jalsi says Arola. Arola. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, good luck looking at all and saying and trying to get close to Arola. Am I saying it right now? Arola. Vincent van Gogh went to Arola. I hope so. Um, he said, he goes on to say, the management of the hospital is, how shall I say, Jesuit. Oh, thanks. That's good to hear. They're very, very able, very clever, very powerful. They're even impressionistic. They know how to make inquiries of an unheard of subtlety, but that amazes and confounds me. And yet, so he's kind of talking here about the religious politics, I guess you could say, that is going on around him. That is a real factor. He says, in fact, this is in a way the cause of my silence. So keep aloof from me in business, and meanwhile I am a man after all. So you know I will shift from myself in matters of conscience, which concern myself alone. I shake your hand in thought, tell your fiance and our mother and sister not to worry about me and to believe that I am on the high road to recovery. Ever yours, Vincent. Quite a powerful letter, and I must say this is the second or third letter that really does communicate an awful lot, doesn't it? So we're going to go straight now to another letter 2 days later, the 24th of March, 1889. And you can see that he, at this point, is painting fish. And is that an expression of how he's feeling? Gutted, um, emptied, helpless, lifeless, vulnerable. And then he also did this one, Still Life with Bloaters. That's certainly a darker view of things. And so he goes on painting the same thing. So let's see what he says about that. 24th of March, which that's the date where I am right now. My dear Thea, I'm writing to tell you that I've seen Signac and it has done me quite a lot of good. Well, you would imagine it would, seeing another artist. He was so good and straightforward and simple when the difficulty of opening the door by force or not presented itself. The police had closed up the house and destroyed the lock. So again, you have confirmation of the true crime element to the story. So let's see, I think the next letter is from Signac. No, it's not. 26th, 29th. There we go. There's a letter from Paul Signac to Van Gogh, and that's waiting for us in April. Oh, so this letter on the 26th is actually written by Signac to Theo. So we can definitely look forward to that. It's in the next letter. So whatever Vincent is saying here, we don't need to take his word for it. We're going to see what Signac says in the very next letter. Okay, so let's see what he says. He was so good and straightforward and simple when the difficulty of opening the door by force or not presented itself. They began by refusing to let us do it, but all the same, we finally got in. I gave him as a keepsake a still life which had annoyed the good gendarmes, that's the local police, of the town of Aries, okay, how do I say it? Arola. And as you know, the gendarmes are called that. So apparently, the fish that he's painting isn't a reference to himself; it's to the police. They call the local police bloaters. Interesting. You remember that I did the same still life 2 or 3 times in Paris and exchanged it once for a carpet in the old days. That is enough to show how meddlesome and what idiots these people are. So this is actually something that he painted some time earlier, right? Doesn't have a date with that. Apparently, this was painted, or this was, I guess, contemporaneous to the incidents in Arola, but I'm rather going to just say all. I found Signac very quiet, though he is said to be so violent. He gave me the impression of someone who has balance and poise, that is all. Rarely or never have I had a conversation with an impressionist so free from discords or conflict on both sides. For instance, he has been to see Jules Dupree and he admires him. Doubtless you had a hand in his coming to stiffen my morale a bit, and thank you for it. So, what he's saying is, I'm sure that you asked Signac to come and see me to boost my morale since you couldn't come down. And obviously, it's worked. Van Gogh is kind of in a better mood, right? Okay. Then he says, I took advantage of my outing to buy a book. Uh, I wonder whether Chelsea can give us the phonetics for that. I'm probably going to butcher it. Sue de la Glebe by Camille Lemonnier. Anywhere close? I have devoured 2 chapters of it. It has such gravity, such depth. Wait till I send it to you. So let's see if we can find out a bit about what he's reading at this crucial time in his life. See what it's actually on Amazon. If you're interested. It's not really. Trying to find a English version of this, but there it is. French edition paperback. Doesn't really say. See if we can translate this. Author Camille Lemonnier, born in Ixelles, Belgium, on March 24, 1844, died in his hometown on June 13, 1913, is a particularly fertile Belgian writer. He completed his secondary studies at blah, blah, blah. So it says here, this book where with a pen as with a plowshare, I've dug through your stony souls and surly soil, in which you eternally die and live again, hard peasants, hearts of flint sharpened with the iron of scythes, muddy and black heroes of hostile labors. Let's have a look at a review. No reviews. Okay. So anyway, the book meant quite a lot to him. He says, I devoured 2 chapters of it. He says, altogether, there are several canvases to be sent to you, as Signac could see. He was not frightened by my painting, as far as I saw. Signac thought, and it is perfectly true, that I looked healthy. So we're going to see whether he says that in his letter. But that again is possible, potential, probable confirmation that Van Gogh isn't mad, that he's just had a temporary kind of setback. So de la Glebe. Okay. And with it I have the desire and the inclination for work. Still, of course, if I had to endure my work and my private life being interfered with every day by gendarmes and poisonous idlers of municipal electors petitioning the mayor, whom they have elected and who consequently depends on their votes, it would be no more than human of me to relapse all over again. Now, you can also imagine that after going through this trauma, that Van Gogh is, when he goes to Auvers, you can imagine that he's going to make a effort not to cause any attention. He's going to kind of have his tail between his legs. The moment that he feels himself disagreeing or argumentative, he's just going to um, what's the word? Turn the other cheek, I guess. What I'm trying to say is, in a situation like this, he realizes that to argue is just really going to shoot himself in the foot. And so he's got to be passive. He's got to appear not to be a threat to anybody. And I feel like where I am in the complex that I stay in, I feel like I'm in the same sort of situation. Um, uh, every time there's a disagreement where somebody tries to cut down a tree or take away my dog, I come out worse off because I'm not the owner of this property. I don't own the place that I stay in, and so I keep being reminded that I'm a nothing in this community, and so if I want to continue staying, and I must say I don't know if I do, but if I do want to continue staying here, then what's the strategy I need to employ? Well, be a nothing. So, in other words, don't really talk to anyone. If something upsets you, don't say anything about it. Just kind of be an invisible person and continue with your work, right? So, it's an unfortunate situation that he's also in, where although he's a person, he's nevertheless in a position where he's quite powerless because he doesn't have his own resources and is in a setting where other people really have control over his fate, right? I'm just saying you can see how when he goes to Auvers, that if he disagrees with Dr. Gachet, he's not really going to make a big deal about it. Or if he does want to make a big deal, he's going to do it in a secretive way or in a subtle way. Anyway, he says, I'm inclined to think that Signac will tell you very much the same thing. In my opinion, we must firmly oppose the loss of the furniture, etc. Then, my lord, I must have liberty to carry on my handicraft. Monsieur Ray says that instead of eating enough and at regular times, I kept myself going on coffee and alcohol. And you can see how anyone is going to get quite sick on a diet of coffee and alcohol. He says, I admit all that, but all the same, it is true that to attain the, excuse me, sorry, I just had a burger before coming on, and it's certainly making its presence heard and felt. He says, to attain the high yellow note that I attained last summer, I really had to be pretty well keyed up. Now it's interesting that he refers to it as not just a high note, but a yellow note. That a high yellow note is a sign of success, a sign of thriving. And I must say, just the other day, I drove through fields of flowering sunflowers. I did think to stop and take photos, but there didn't seem to be time. He says, and that after all, an artist is a man with his work to do, and it is not for the first idler who comes along to crush him for good. Am I to suffer imprisonment or the madhouse? Why not? Didn't Rochefort and Hugo, Corneille, and others give an eternal example by submitting to exile, and the first even to a convict prison? And so he seems to see um, what he needs to do as he must be in submission. And, he does ultimately go to the asylum. I mean, he basically um, admits himself to the asylum at Saint Remy. Now, if you think about it, someone who cuts off his ear, someone who cuts off his own ear, and another person who, well, let me put it this way. Do you think someone who cuts off his ear would be someone who would say, yes, by all means, I want to go to the asylum, I'm mad? Or do you think there's a bit of a mismatch there that someone who cuts off his own ear is out of control, out of his mind, irrational, unreasonable? Whereas somebody who says, okay, I'll submit to going to this asylum, that's a very reasonable, an extremely reasonable way to respond to this whole situation, isn't it? Looks like I've created a monster. Now I'm going to be criticized every time I pronounce something. Um, but all I want to say is this, that this is a thing above the mere question of illness and death, illness and health. Naturally, one is beside oneself in parallel cases. I do not say equivalent, being in a very inferior and secondary place to theirs, but I do say parallel. And that is what the first and last cause of my aberration was. So when he says there is a cause of my aberration, he says that he felt inferior and secondary. And didn't he feel inferior and secondary to Gauguin? Do you guys agree with that? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, here he's actually giving a reason. He's now had time to reflect. He's had now time to calm down. He's had time to gather himself. And he says, the first and last cause of my aberration. When he says first cause, it's the underlying reason for it. But he's also saying, at the end of the day, the reason for this was he felt inferior, very inferior, and secondary. And wouldn't he have felt like that in terms of Gauguin? When Gauguin went to Arles, he and I mean, I could stop and go back and try and pronounce it correctly, but it would just take a little bit longer. I'm going to pronounce it all because that's I would say, the anglicized pronunciation. I think if you came on here and you were English and I said Arola, you would not know what I'm talking about. So that's the justification. You can imagine this artist coming to all when he does, and he's just sold an artwork, and then I think he sold two or three more in short shrift. Just the fact that Gauguin pitches up on his doorstep and instantly is selling art is going to make Van Gogh feel invalidated, feel envious, feel secondary, right? And then not only that, it's also Gorgan's agency. Gorgan comes there and then leaves. Vincent doesn't really have that freedom. You know, he can't just go wherever he wants. He doesn't really have money. He's got to really ask permission from his brother. Gorgan probably was womanizing in a much more, you know, with probably higher class prostitutes, but he was also in love with, I think, what's his name? What was his name? Can't believe I can't remember his name. Their mutual friend's sister. Can anyone remember his name? All the focus on pronouncing correctly, and I know his name is fairly difficult to pronounce. Um, let's see what you guys say. Sharon says maybe didn't mind going to the asylum because he wouldn't be alone there. I don't think that's the reason. I think it wasn't going to cost anything, and at last he would be out of everyone's way. Um, Bernard, that's who I'm thinking of. Bernard. So Gauguin was, first of all, he had married, he had kids. Then at the point that he went to Arles, he was um, in love with Bernard's sister, right? And if you think about that, is Gauguin's love life compared to Vincent's, you know, Vincent really has, you know, it's almost like you could count them on one hand, 5 or 6 girlfriends in 15 odd years. You know, that's like less than a real girlfriend every 2 years. And they don't really last very long, do they? Anyway, let's continue. He says, and that is what the first and last of my aberration was. Do you know those words of the Dutch poets? I'm attached to the earth by more than earthly ties. This is what I've experienced in the midst of much suffering, above all, in my so called mental illness. So, you know, he even refers to it as so called mental illness, so called, and yet the art experts say, no, 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 it was actually real mental illness. So it just shows you how the art experts basically just draw a line through Van Gogh's own defense of himself, and that they just decided what they think it is. And of course, the madness narrative, the mad artist narrative, sells much better than the one that's more subtle and more difficult, especially the syphilis suffering artist. He says, unfortunately, I have a handicraft which I do not know well enough to express myself as I should like. I pull myself up short for fear of a relapse and I pass on to something else. Before you leave, could you send me 3 tubes zinc white, 1 tube same size cobalt, 1 tube ultramarine, 4 tubes of malachite green, 1 emerald green, 1 tube of orange lead. This in case, probable enough, if I find a way of resuming my work again, I should set to work shortly in the orchards again. Oh, if only nothing had happened to mess up my life. And, you know, it is quite sad to think about how long he pined for Gauguin to join him, how long he sweated and, you know, prepared the yellow house, and then boom, it was all over. And then there was this long, damaging aftermath. He says, let's think well before going to another place. You see that I've no better luck in the south than in the north. It's pretty much the same everywhere. And you've kind of got to think, what is he doing wrong? Um, if you were Van Gogh today, what is he doing wrong? And I would say maybe he needs to spend a bit more time on um, his social skills, dressing properly, giving a damn what other people think. You know, how can I put it? You can say you don't give a damn what people think, but you, there by the grace of God, go you if you don't give a damn what people think. Make no mistake, whether you give a damn or not what people think can have a real impact on your life. And if you rub enough people the wrong way, that can have a real impact on your life as well. Yeah, I know what you're saying. That's also true. I also think so. Could be, could be, could also have been a factor. He says, I'm thinking of frankly accepting my role of madman. So, it's almost like he's been told he's mad. And so he says, well, okay, if you think I'm mad, then that's what I am. And isn't that what he does when he goes to the asylum? And again, bear in mind, he paints this like virtually upon arrival at the asylum. Is this the work of a madman? I mean, if people really thought Starry Night was completely mad, I don't think it would be one of the most popular and recognizable works in Western art. I think it is praised and recognized as someone seeing the world in a hyper real way, not in a way that's unreal, but in a way that is almost animated. Anyway, let's continue. So he says, I'm thinking of frankly accepting my role of madman the way Degas acted the part of a notary. But there it is. So can you see he's saying acting the part? So, if you think I'm sucking it out of my thumb, that when Van Gogh died, you say, if he if he if he didn't shoot himself, why did he say that he did? Well, it's the same thing. If he didn't cut off his ear, why did he say that he did? You might say that's a brilliant rhetorical question, it's a brilliant argument. Well, here you have him saying, where he's talking about accepting a role in terms of how he's going to present himself, and where he talks about someone who acted a certain part. Isn't that what he did as well? Anyway, I'm just saying he's talking about that here. But there it is. I do not feel that altogether I have strength enough for such a part. You talk to me of what you call the real South. The reason why I shall never go there is above. I rightly leave that to men who have a more well balanced mind, more integrity than I. I am only good for something intermediate and second rate and self effaced. How intense my feelings may be, or whatever power of expression I may acquire at an age when physical passions have lessened, I could never build an imposing structure on such a moldy, shattered past. And so it is really incredible that with barely a month to go, this is how Van Gogh is feeling about himself. He's feeling, he says, I'm second rate. He says that is building something on a shattered past. He's saying, there are other men with a more balanced mind than I have, with more integrity than I have. And so he really has been, is extremely humbled immediately prior to painting Starry Night. And you must get the impression that what Starry Night's trying to communicate is the magnificence of the world, the bounty of the world in terms of the heavens, that is right there above us and around us, if one could only recognize it and reach it, or conversely, if that whatever it is in the air, that electricity could just infuse into us, or something similar. Okay, so he goes on to say, so it is more or less the same to me what happens to me, even my staying here. I think in the end my fate will be evened up. So beware of sudden starts. Since you're getting married and I'm getting too old, that is the only policy to suit us. You can see there's a little bit of a sense of resignation creeping into him. You know, Van Gogh's been a fighter, he's been someone who's really been determined and working really, really hard. You can see there's a little bit of resignation creeping into his heart. Who can blame him? Goodbye for now. Write to me without delay, and believe me, after asking you to give my kindest regards to mother or sister and your fiancé, your very affectionate brother, Vincent. I will send the book by Camille Lemonnier pretty soon. Okay, so we're going to end off with this letter from Signac. It's not a very long letter. Also not a very long live. It's we're almost at the 1.5 hour mark. I'm not going to go beyond that. I don't want to go too far beyond the dates that we're dealing with. So we're not going to deal with the 29th of March, which is quite a long letter, and then we're into April. And then it's a letter in April. There's a letter from Signac to Van Gogh. Anyway, let's see what he says. Dear Mr. Van Gogh, I found your brother in perfect health, physically and mentally. Right? And now you've got to ask yourself, and excuse my French, what the fuck is going on with the art experts who say what they say? When you've got a witness here saying, wow, he's absolutely fine. What the F? He goes on to say, yesterday afternoon and again this morning, we went for a walk together. He took me along to see his pictures, many of which are very good and all of which are very curious. His courteous doctor, the house physician Ray, is of the opinion that if he should lead a very methodical life, eating and drinking normally and at regular hours, there would be every chance that the terrible crisis would not repeat themselves at all. So, yeah, you have a third party, right? A witness, essentially, saying, do you know what the doctor recommends for this terrible madness that is afflicting Vincent van Gogh? Well, just eat regular meals. Eat normally. Eat and drink normally. In other words, don't starve yourself and then drink excessively. Don't drink coffee and alcohol. Don't only drink coffee and alcohol. Eat and drink normally. That doesn't sound like someone who's got like some kind of severe affliction. It's quite a simple antidote. Eat and drink normally. Also, he says, eat and drink normally and at regular hours. Wow, okay. It's quite a simple recipe for needing to behave normally or to become healthy. He also says he needs to lead a methodical life, and he certainly does that in the last months of his life, where he paints methodically. Right? Anyway, let's go on. He's quite willing to keep him all the time that would be necessary. He thinks that all the expenses of his stay in the hospital will have to be defrayed by the municipality, because it was at the administration's demand that he was kept in the asylum. Now, there you have a reference to the asylum as basically a hospital, but it's quite interesting. You can see in a way why this situation with Van Gogh is creating such a furore is because the municipality are going to have to pay for this. Taxpayers are going to have to pay for it, right? anyway, he says, at any rate, if he does not go back to Paris, which in Monsieur Ray's opinion would be preferable, and guess what? That is what he ends up doing. That is what he ends up doing. He doesn't end up going to Paris, but he certainly goes. Um, Basically, I mean, he does. When he goes back, he does go and see his brother. He does go back to Paris. He ends up going and settling not far from where his brother lived. And I suppose one could argue if he'd settled closer to Theo, he could have been saved by a medical procedure after he was shot. You could definitely make that argument. Because, if it takes somebody 30 hours to die, bear in mind it took Helena Hutchins 2 or 3 hours to die. It took Van Gogh 30 hours to die. You can tell that the amount of blood loss was a lot less. And also the severity of his injuries were a lot less as well. It was what he experienced was survivable. Anyway, let's continue. I'm not sure that's not the antidote, Yvonne. Like if you think that, I mean, obviously he is struggling with loneliness, and obviously it's difficult painting without selling your work. But his problem is that he's spending money that should be on food and other things, clothing. He's spending quite a lot just on the art. So I do think um, if he ate properly, sometimes it takes having a person who loves you near you, a wife, a husband, a some kind of caregiver to make you realize, to eat when you need to eat and all that kind of thing. Anyway, he says it would be necessary for him to move to another house as his neighbors are hostile to him. So Signac has understood that Van Gogh's neighbors have totally turned against him. This is also what your brother desires, for at the earliest possible date he wants to leave this asylum, where after all he must necessarily suffer under the continual surveillance, which often has to be of a petty nature. So you see, Signac is basically confirming what Van Gogh is saying. Van Gogh has called these people cowards and skunks. Signac, who's a total outsider, says, you know what? They are being very petty. They are being completely unreasonable. And he's a Frenchman. It's not like he's a Dutch artist from Newnan, and so obviously he'd be on their side. He's a French artist. He understands what's going on. He says, summarizing, I emphatically assure you that I found him in a condition of perfect health and sanity. This is the second fucking time Signac is basically saying, I'm telling you, this guy's not mad. Your brother is not mad. So where does this nonsense come from that Van Gogh went mad and cut off his ear? Do you see? There's only one thing he wishes: to be able to work in tranquility. And that is what we know. That is what he's been saying, repeated so often. I just want to be allowed to work, right? So he says, so do your best to grant him this happiness. How dismal the life he is living must be for him. I shake your hand cordially, dear Mr. Van Gogh, Paul Signac, letter to be called for at Cassis. And so, even Signac recognizes that he's going through a very hard time. And yet how can I put it? He's going through a very hard time now. If he was really depressed, if he was mentally unstable, if he was extremely unhappy, well, now would be the time. He's been abandoned by the townsfolk. He's been abandoned by Gorgan. His brother is living happily ever after, and he could imagine legitimately doesn't really need him that much anymore. And he may even imagine that he's a burden to Theo. Now would be the time to do it. And yet he doesn't, because he's got a passion, he's got a will to live, right? He's got a drive, he's got a vision for his life. Okay, so I think we're going to leave it at that. There is another letter from Vincent to Theo 3 days later, but we will deal with that next time. I just want to see if there's any recent news on Vincent van Gogh. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to read this. I think the last time we couldn't. But I think this is quite a simple question and answer. Did Van Gogh's brother Theo have syphilis? Anyone know the answer? And so he even gives this as the reason why Van Gogh took his life, because he knew his brother had syphilis. Wow. Okay. Wow. So let's have a look at this article. For many years, it was regarded as distasteful to suggest that Theo, the painter's brother, died of syphilis. And I think it was very, for many years, I think you should actually say for decades, it was distasteful to say the same about Vincent. Theo's son, named Vincent after his artistic uncle, lived until 1978. Understandably, he disliked any mention of the topic. So basically, the inheritor of the Van Gogh legacy, which is ultimately Vincent van Gogh, Vincent's nephew, doesn't really want to talk about it. And so you can imagine, so how does the myth of who he really was come about? Well, when you don't want to talk about the reality, that's how. So let's have a look at what he says here. Since the death of Theo's son, his descendants have become more relaxed about the medical diagnosis. The Van Gogh Museum's annotated version of the artist's letters now records that by September 1890, Theo was in the advanced stages of syphilis. But when did Theo first realize that he had caught the dreaded disease? And did he tell his brother Vincent? In May 1888, so about 2 years before Vincent's death, Theo wrote about a medical consultation he had in Paris with Dr. David Gruby. Vincent responded that he was upset by the resulting news. Vincent went on to allude to the fact that his brother was taking potassium iodide. This medication is widely used in cases of cerebral syphilis, although it was also prescribed for other conditions. Now, when he talks about cerebral syphilis, I think that is the same as neurosyphilis. So, what is so crazy is his younger brother is struggling with cerebral syphilis, and yet why can't people see that with Vincent? Vincent added that he was expecting Dr. Gruby would have advised his brother not to see women. Vincent also referred to Theo's heart condition, and one wonders whether this might possibly have been a euphemism for a disease that Theo had caught from a sexual companion. It seems likely that Theo, who also had other medical problems, was diagnosed by Dr. Gruby as having developed syphilis. Now, another thing that I think is interesting is if you say a doctor in Paris diagnosed in 1888 one of the Van Gogh brothers as having advanced syphilis, wouldn't the word spread not only among doctors in Paris, but amongst doctors that are knowledgeable about art? So, doctors in the art circle about the Van Gogh that has got syphilis. And wouldn't that be one way Dr. Gachet may have found out or suspected why Van Gogh had the condition he had? Okay, let's just have a look at this. 8 months later, Vincent painted a still life which prominently depicted a copy of the Manual Anne de la Santé, a popular health manual by R.F. Raspail. Although Vincent was presumably primarily concerned with his own health, well, there you have it. This book does include 5 pages, a 5-page section on secret diseases, venereal syphilitic. And you may remember not that long ago, we dealt with a reference he made to Raspail, right? Medical records opened up to researchers in 1992 confirmed that Theo suffered from dementia paralytica, a symptom of late-stage syphilis. So it's quite interesting. Theo has syphilis and has some kind of mental health issues because of that, but Vincent doesn't. Anyway, I often find that this particular art expert is very hit and miss. He's got some good ideas and then he spoils it with some bad analysis, in my opinion. But anyway, if you want to read the article, there it is. I think there's another article in the Smithsonian. A Vincent van Gogh self-portrait is at the center of a new exhibition on the art of the selfie. I don't know if that looks to me like a very genuine Van Gogh. I suppose it could be. Anyway, I'm not going to take you guys through that though. Okay. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here on such short notice. Got up to, I think, about 30 people in chat, even though there was virtually no notice. Theo was married about 2 years. Yeah. And interestingly, Joe seemed to have quite a long life. So, not quite sure how syphilis works, but maybe she was infected, but because she lived a healthy life, she beat because it's a bacterial infection. So maybe that's kind of what happened. Yeah, Deborah says, what a life back then. Also, you might think that the church would frown on the lifestyle of going to brothels and having mistresses and whatnot. It's hard to say. I'm not actually sure if the church did feel that way. I can imagine if you're a Roman Catholic, that could be the case. But certainly in France, having a mistress was quite ordinary. And in the artist circle, it really wasn't a big deal for artists to go to brothels regularly. But it might be a big deal, I guess, for some people. So who knows? Mel still says, keep weaving. Deborah, thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. Chelsea, thanks also for being here at such short notice. Appreciate it. Chelsea says she could have taken more advanced meds for the disease. Possibly. But you can also imagine she has a child. She's not going to be visiting the brothel very much herself. or at all. Okay, so that's it from me. I'll be back next week with episode 78, and I think that I think either episode 79 or episode 80 will be when he actually paints um, Starry Night. I'm just trying to remember if he paints it in April or May. It could actually be May that he paints it. But we're getting very close to when this incredible painting is painted. You can see that he was in a horrible state of mind. He was in a horrible predicament. And so, it says something about how adversity can bring out the best in us. You know, can you imagine if you could appear as like a blue fairy through space and time to Van Gogh and say, by the way, don't despair because you are about to paint a masterpiece that's going to change the world. So, although your life may seem like Luke Skywalker dying in the snow, actually, something incredible is about to happen. Don't despair. That's literally where he is. He's about to paint something that is going to change art history. But look at the place where he is. He's in a place of incredible um, emotional pain, physical suffering. His social status is at an all-time low. He feels embarrassed and small and powerless. He feels quite lost in his life. He doesn't really have much agency. People don't believe him. And what must be so much more frustrating and it's not so easy for me to convey this because you need to do it in kind of one go. But he was finding his groove as an artist. He was just finding, he was starting to produce excellent artworks when all of that was disrupted by all of this nonsense. And that's got to be the most frustrating thing. That's got to be pretty frustrating. You've found your voice. It's taken so long, and then that gets taken away from you. That gets interrupted by nonsense. That is very frustrating. Okay, Chelsea says it did change the world. He changed the world. That's true. Thanks a lot, Mel. Okay. Anyway, that's it from me. If you guys are watching this on repeat, thanks for watching till the end. Remember, you're welcome to hit the thanks button. Um, Whenever you're watching this, if you're watching it over the weekend, I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend. And I'll see you guys next week for for letter number, well, for episode 78. It should be pretty interesting. I'm sure you'll agree with me that things are getting very dramatic, certainly at this point. The police are involved, other artists are involved. Um, Theo is getting married, he's going to have a child soon. Big things are taking place. It's all pretty incredible. Anyway, again, Terry's in our thoughts. She's just having her birthday and she's gone to Jackson Hole to spend it. We wish her well. And we've missed you not being here. So hopefully Jackson Hole is going to be worthwhile and exciting. Take care, guys. And I'll see you guys next time. Where's my play out video? I just need to go back to that. Okay. Cheers, guys.